5 years is a long time to sleep alone. For Gabriel Mercer, a man who owned half the city's concrete and all its vice, the isolation wasn't a punishment. It was a quarantine. He kept his sheets cold and his doors locked, convinced the rot inside him was contagious. Nobody touched him. Nobody dared. Until a Tuesday in November, when a worn-out sedan lost its brakes on black ice and slammed right into a ghost. Silence in Gabriel's world was usually bought. He paid for soundproofed walls in his penthouse. He paid for quiet engines in his armored cars. He paid men to keep their mouths shut. But the silence that had settled into his bones over the last 5 years was entirely free. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that arrived the night his wife died in a crossfire he failed to predict. Since then, his bed was a museum exhibit. Half of it remained perfectly made. The other half was where he stared at the ceiling until dawn, waiting for a heart attack or an assassin. Neither had the courtesy to show up. It was 20 degrees below freezing. The sky was the color of old cement. Gabriel sat in the back of his Mercedes Maybach, nursing a lukewarm coffee. His driver, Leo, navigated the slick downtown streets with the precision of a surgeon. Gabriel wasn't looking at the city. He was looking through it. 2 blocks away, Sadie Collins was fighting a losing battle against a 2008 Honda Civic. The heater had died 3 weeks ago. Her hands, gripping the steering wheel, were blue at the knuckles. She was running 20 minutes late for a double shift at a logistics firm that paid her just enough to stay aggressively broke. She was tired, the kind of tired that settles in the marrow and makes your teeth ache. The light at the intersection turned yellow. Sadie pressed the brake pedal. It went straight to the floorboard. With a sickening, frictionless glide, the pedal offered zero resistance. Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like copper in her mouth. She pumped the brakes. Nothing. The Civic hit a patch of black ice, spinning 50 degrees to the right. Time slowed down. She saw the sleek, matte black Maybach crossing the intersection. It looked like a very expensive hearse. She braced for the sound. The crunch of metal on metal was deafening. The Civic torpedoed into the rear passenger side of the Maybach. The impact threw Sadie violently against the steering wheel before the airbag exploded, punching her in the face with a cloud of white dust and the smell of burnt gunpowder. Inside the Maybach, Gabriel was thrown against the reinforced door. His coffee painted the pristine leather interior brown. Leo slammed on the brakes, sending the massive car into a controlled skid before coming to a halt. "Boss, you good?" Leo's voice was sharp, a hand already reaching into his jacket. Gabriel adjusted his jaw. A dull ache throbbed in his shoulder. "I'm fine. Don't shoot anyone." He opened his door before Leo could stop him. The cold air bit into his skin. He walked around to the rear of the car. The side panel was crushed, exposing the Kevlar lining beneath the luxury shell. Then he looked at the offender. A rusted silver Civic, its front end accordion folded into the street. Smoke hissed from the radiator. Gabriel walked toward the driver's side. He expected an assassination attempt. He expected a terrified teenager. He did not expect the door to kick open, nearly taking out his knees. Sadie stumbled out. She was coughing, waving away the airbag dust. A thin line of red tracked down from a cut near her hairline, cutting through the pale exhaustion of her face. She leaned against the crumpled frame of her car, breathing hard. Gabriel stopped 2 feet away. He waited for the crying. He waited for the hysterics. Sadie looked at the ruined front of her car, then at the dented armor of his Maybach. She closed her eyes, letting out a long, ragged exhale. "Well," she muttered, her voice raspy from the smoke. "That's just fantastic. I'm going to be so incredibly fired." Gabriel blinked. It was a microscopic reaction, But for a man who hadn't been surprised in half a decade, it was an earthquake. You just totaled a $500,000 vehicle. Sadie opened her eyes. They were a muted, storm cloud grey. She looked him up and down. Expensive wool coat, custom Italian shoes, the cold, dead-eyed stare of a man who hurt people for a living. "I'm pretty sure my insurance covers up to 20 grand, she said flatly. "So you're only out 480,000. Congratulations." Her knees finally buckled. She didn't faint, just sank against the doorframe, sliding down to the icy asphalt. She wrapped her cheap, thin coat tighter around herself. Leo was suddenly at Gabriel's side, hand resting on the grip of his pistol. "Do we call it in? Bring the cleaners?" Gabriel stared at the woman sitting on the freezing street, more concerned about her shift than the mob boss standing over her. For 5 years, women had treated Gabriel with either desperate ambition or crippling fear. This woman was annoyed. "No," Gabriel said, his voice quiet. "Help her up. We're taking her to dock." "Boss, the cops." "I said help her up." Gabriel stepped forward, reaching down. Sadie looked at his outstretched hand. It was a large hand, calloused at the knuckles. She didn't take it. She planted her palms on the frozen road and pushed herself up, swaying slightly. "I don't need a ride," she slurred slightly, the concussion starting to knock at the door of her consciousness. "I need to catch the bus." Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed. Gabriel caught her before she hit the ice. She was light, too light. He held her against his chest, the smell of cheap vanilla shampoo and ozone filling his senses. It was the first time in 5 years he had held a woman. His chest tightened, a rusty valve trying to crank open. "Open the door," Gabriel told Leo. The clinic didn't look like a clinic. It was the back half of a high-end veterinary office in the warehouse district, soundproofed and sterilized, equipped with machinery most municipal hospitals couldn't afford. Dr. Aris wiped his hands on a towel. He was a man who made a very good living asking 0 questions. He looked at Gabriel, who was standing in the corner of the recovery room, arms crossed, staring at the cot. "Mild concussion, bruised ribs. She needs to eat more. She's severely undernourished," which didn't help with the shock. "But she'll live," Aris said in a hushed tone. "Who is she?" "Collateral." "A civilian," Gabriel said. "Brakes failed." Aris raised an eyebrow. Gabriel never brought civilians here. If a civilian got hurt, Gabriel's lawyers threw money at them until they went away. Gabriel bringing a woman into the underground was a breach of protocol that bordered on insanity. "She's waking up," Aris murmured, turning back to the cot. Sadie groaned. The harsh fluorescent lights stabbed at her retinas. She cracked her eyes open, squinting against the glare. The ceiling was white acoustic tile. Not the hospital, not her apartment. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her ribs shoved her right back down. "Keep still," Gabriel said from the shadows. Sadie snapped her head toward the voice. The movement made the room spin. Gabriel stepped into the light. He looked even larger indoors. The harsh lighting cast long shadows over his face, highlighting the sharp angle of his jaw and the hollows of his cheeks. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the Clinton administration. "Where am I?" Sadie asked. Her voice was raspy. She didn't sound scared, just intensely suspicious. "A private facility. You have a concussion," Gabriel stated, unmoving. Sadie looked around. She saw the heart monitor, the IV bag hooked into her arm, and Dr. Aris standing nearby in a pristine white coat. "Is this a kidnapping?" she asked. "Because if it is, you grabbed the wrong girl. My bank account is currently overdrawn by $12, and my emergency contact is my landlord, who hates me. A short, sudden sound escaped Gabriel. It took him a second to realize it was a laugh. It felt foreign and sharp in his throat. Aris looked at Gabriel as if the boss had just grown a second head. "It's not a kidnapping," Gabriel said, stepping closer to the bed. "You passed out at the scene. If I left you for the paramedics, the police would have involved themselves. My line of work makes police involvement inconvenient." Sadie processed this. Her head throbbed. She looked at his suit. She looked at the sterile, windowless room. The pieces clicked together with the heavy finality of a jail cell door shutting. "Your mob," she stated. "I am a businessman," Gabriel corrected smoothly. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." Sadie reached up, her fingers fumbling with the tape holding the IV needle in her arm. "What are you doing?" Gabriel stepped forward, a flash of genuine alarm breaking his stoic facade. "Discharging myself," she grunted, peeling the tape back. "I'm late for work. If I don't show up, I don't get paid. If I don't get paid, I get evicted." Gabriel grabbed her wrist. His grip was firm, but he pulled his strength, careful not to bruise her. Her skin was warm under his fingers. The contact sent a jolt up his arm, settling deep in his chest. He hadn't touched a woman in 5 years, not even casually. Now his thumb was pressed against her pulse point. It was beating fast, like a trapped bird. "You have a concussion. You're not going anywhere," Gabriel said, his voice dropping an octave, commanding, authoritative. The tone that made grown men empty their bank accounts and flee the state. Sadie looked at his hand holding her wrist. Then she looked up into his eyes. "Let go of me." She didn't shout. She didn't tremble. It was a simple, absolute demand. Gabriel stared at her. He could break her wrist with a twitch of his muscles. He was Gabriel Mercer. He ruled the underground. And yet, looking into the exhausted, defiant grey eyes of a woman who weighed maybe 110 pounds, soaking wet, he found himself opening his fingers. He stepped back. Sadie yanked the IV out. She grabbed a cotton swab from a nearby tray and pressed it against the bead of blood welling up on her arm. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed. The room tilted violently, but she locked her knees and stood up. "My coat," she demanded. Aris, looking completely out of his depth, handed her the cheap, blood-stained jacket. Sadie put it on, wincing as the fabric pulled against her bruised ribs. She looked at Gabriel. "Look, I'm sorry about your car, but you kept me out of a police report, so we'll call it even. Don't look for me. I won't look for you." She walked past him. She made it exactly 4 steps toward the heavy steel door before her legs gave out again. Gabriel caught her. This time, he didn't just support her, he scooped her up entirely. She was too exhausted to fight. She slumped against his chest, her head resting just beneath his collarbone. "You're an idiot," Gabriel muttered, looking down at her. "You're a criminal," she mumbled back, her eyes sliding shut. Gabriel looked at Eris. "Keep her here. Keep her sedated if you have to. I'll be back tomorrow." Gabriel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark of his penthouse, a glass of amber liquid sweating onto the mahogany side table. He was staring at the empty half of his bed. For 5 years, it had been a monument to his failure. Now, strangely, it just looked like an empty bed. He couldn't get the smell of cheap vanilla out of his head. He couldn't shake the phantom sensation of her pulse against his thumb. Sadie. Aris had found her wallet. Sadie Collins. 28. Lived in the Narrows. A neighborhood Gabriel's syndicate technically controlled, but largely ignored because it was too poor to extort. She was a ghost just like him. Only she was being haunted by poverty, not violence. The next afternoon, Gabriel walked into the clinic. Aris was sitting at his desk, reviewing charts. "Where is she?" Gabriel asked, shedding his overcoat. Gone, Aris said, not looking up. Gabriel froze. A cold spike of adrenaline, something he hadn't felt in a very long time, hit his system. What do you mean, gone? I told you to keep her. Gabriel, I'm a doctor, not a warden, Aris sighed, finally looking up. She woke up at 6 a.m. She threatened to scream bloody murder and break my equipment if I didn't let her walk out that door. She took a cab. I paid for it. Put it on your tab. Gabriel stood in the doorway of the empty recovery room. The bed was made. The sheets were crisp. It looked exactly like his bed at home. He hated it. Get Leo, Gabriel barked to one of his guards in the hall. Tell him to find her. It took Leo 3 hours. Sadie Collins was easy to track if you had the resources of a shadow government. She worked at a diner during the day and a logistics firm at night. At 4 p.m., Gabriel's Maybach, now driving with a temporary armoured replacement for the crushed door, pulled up across the street from a rundown diner with a flickering neon sign. Gabriel sat in the back, watching through the tinted glass. He saw her through the diner window. She was wearing a faded blue uniform, her hair tied back in a messy knot, a small white bandage over the cut on her forehead. She was pouring coffee for a booth full of truckers. She looked exhausted. She looked beautiful. Gabriel didn't know what he was doing. Men in his position didn't stalk waitresses. They didn't feel a hollow ache in their chest over a hit-and-run driver. But he couldn't leave. You want me to bring her out, boss? Leo asked from the front seat, glancing in the rearview mirror. No. Gabriel watched her wipe down a counter. Find out how much she owes. Owes who? Everyone. The next morning, Sadie walked out of her apartment building. The cold wind whipped off the river, cutting through her thin coat. She mentally calculated how many shifts she needed to pick up to afford a down payment on a used car. The math made her want to weep. She stepped onto the sidewalk and stopped dead. Parked perfectly in front of her building was a dark grey Volvo. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid, heavy, and practically radiated safety. A man in a tailored suit was leaning against the hood. It was Leo. Sadie walked up to him, her guard instantly up. What is this? Leo stood straight. He held out a set of keys. Compliments of Mr. Mercer. Sadie stared at the keys. She didn't take them. Who the hell is Mr. Mercer? The man whose car you hit. Leo nudged the keys closer. It's registered in your name. Taxes and insurance are paid for the next 5 years. It's got snow tires. Sadie looked at the Volvo. It was worth more than her life. She looked back at Leo. No. Leo blinked. Excuse me. I said no. Sadie shoved her hands deep into her coat pockets. I don't take handouts from mobsters. I don't want his car. I don't want his guilt money. Tell him thanks, but I'll walk. She turned on her heel and started marching down the sidewalk toward the bus stop. Leo watched her go, completely baffled. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Boss, Leo said when Gabriel answered. We have a problem. She rejected the car. In his office, overlooking the city skyline, Gabriel leaned back in his leather chair. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, cracking the 5-year ice. Did she? Gabriel murmured. Yeah, walked right past it. Said she doesn't take handouts. Gabriel looked down at his hands. For the first time in a long time, he felt entirely awake. The quarantine was over. The ghost was breathing. Leave the keys in her mailbox, Gabriel said softly. I'll handle Ms. Collins myself. The diner was a grease trap at the edge of the Narrows. It smelled perpetually of burnt filter coffee, industrial bleach, and stale fry oil. The linoleum floor was sticky, and the vinyl booths were patched with duct tape that had long since peeled at the edges. It was a place for people who worked with their hands and didn't look too closely at the expiration dates on the ketchup bottles. At 1 p.m. on a Thursday, the lunch rush was a chaotic symphony of clattering plates and shouted orders. Sadie balanced 3 plates of meatloaf on her left arm and carried a carafe of coffee in her right. Her ribs screamed with every step, the deep purple bruising from the steering wheel protesting the movement. She ignored it. Pain was just another bill she couldn't afford to pay. The bell above the glass door chimed. It was a cheap, tinny sound. The diner didn't go completely silent, but the volume dropped by half. Conversations stalled. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Sadie dumped the meatloaf at booth 4, gave the truckers a tight smile, and turned around to see what had sucked the air out of the room. Gabriel Mercer was standing by the door. He didn't bring muscle. Leo wasn't looming behind him, but Gabriel brought his own weather system. He wore a charcoal wool suit that likely cost more than the diner's annual gross revenue. The cut of it emphasized the broad slope of his shoulders and the rigid, unyielding line of his spine. He looked at the cracked leather stools at the counter. Then his dark, calculating eyes found her. Sadie closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. She took a breath that tasted like aerosol grease. "I'll take booth 4, Mary," she told the older waitress rushing past. "I've got the counter." She walked behind the counter, grabbed a damp rag, and started wiping down the formica surface directly in front of the cash register. Gabriel moved through the diner. He didn't dodge the tightly packed tables. The patrons subtly shifted out of his way. He sat down on a stool. It groaned under his weight. "Menu?" Sadie asked, not looking up from the counter. "Coffee, black." His voice was a low rumble that managed to cut through the background noise of the grill. Sadie grabbed a thick white ceramic mug. She filled it to the brim, a few drops spilling over the edge, and slid it toward him. $2. Gabriel pulled a slim silver money clip from his interior pocket. He slid a crisp $100 bill across the formica. "I don't have change for that," Sadie said flatly. "Keep it." Sadie picked up the bill. She didn't pocket it. She walked over to the ancient, heavy cash register, hit the button for the safe drop beneath the counter, and spent a solid minute counting out $98 in crumpled 5s, 10s, and 1s. She walked back and placed the disorganized stack of cash next to his coffee. $2, she repeated. Gabriel looked at the pile of dirty money, then up at her face. The bandage on her forehead was stark white against her pale skin. The dark circles under her eyes looked permanent. "You didn't take the car," he stated. "I don't drive Volvos. I'm a Honda girl." She picked up a ticket order and stabbed it onto the metal wheel above the pass. "Or I was." "It's a practical vehicle. Safe. It's a bribe." Sadie finally leaned against the counter, crossing her arms carefully over her bruised chest. "I don't know how things work in your tax bracket, Mr. Mercer, but down here, nothing is free. You give me a car, I owe you. I don't owe anyone, not anymore. I'm keeping it that way. You hit my car. Technically, I should be the one collecting a debt. Then sue me." She grabbed a fresh pot of coffee. "Take half of my tips, but I'm not taking your charity." Gabriel took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible. It tasted like ash and copper. He took another sip. "You work here during the day," he observed, "and the warehouse at night. You sleep on average 4 hours. You eat 1 meal a day, usually here, usually a shift meal." Sadie froze, the coffee pot hovering over a mug. Her grey eyes snapped to his, narrowing into slits of pure ice. "You're having me followed." "I have you observed. There is a distinction." "Not to the police, there isn't." Gabriel offered a faint, humorless smile. "The police do not concern me, Sadie." Hearing her name in his mouth felt strange. It wasn't a threat, but it carried weight. He said it the way a man tests the structural integrity of a bridge before crossing it. "Stop observing me," she said, her voice dropping, losing the defensive sarcasm and settling into something dangerously serious. "I am not a project. I am not a pet. I am a woman trying to pay her rent. Go back to your penthouse and find a hobby." She turned her back to him, busying herself with slicing a cherry pie. Gabriel sat there for another 10 minutes. He drank the terrible coffee. He watched the tight line of her shoulders, the mechanical, exhausted efficiency of her movements. For 5 years, women had tried to read his mind, catering to his every perceived whim to earn a fraction of his attention. This woman was threatening to call the cops on him because he bought her a car. It was infuriating. It was intoxicating. He stood up, leaving the $98 on the counter. He walked out without another word. When Sadie turned back around, the stool was empty. She looked at the stack of cash. With a heavy sigh, she scooped it up, walked to the register, and dropped it into the communal tip jar. The hallway of Sadie's apartment building smelled like damp carpet and boiled cabbage. The overhead fluorescent tube flickered, emitting a low, angry buzz that set her teeth on edge. It was 11:30 p.m. She had just finished a 9-hour shift at the logistics warehouse, moving boxes of electronics that weighed more than she did. Her hands were blistered. Her ribs felt like shattered glass. She just wanted a hot shower, even if the water in her building only stayed hot for 3 minutes. She turned the corner to her door at the end of the hall and stopped. A man was leaning against her doorframe. He was thick through the middle, wearing a leather jacket that strained across his shoulders and smelled aggressively of cheap drugstore cologne and stale cigarettes. His name was Barrett. He collected rent for the landlord, a slumlord who owned half the crumbling brick buildings in the Narrows. Barrett also collected on the side loans the landlord forced his tenants into when they couldn't make rent. "Sadie," Barrett grinned. He had a gold tooth that caught the flickering hallway light. "Working late. Rent isn't due for 4 days, Barrett." Sadie didn't move closer. She kept a solid 10 feet between them. "Rent ain't the problem, sweetheart. It's the interest on the principal. Mr. Higgins says you're 3 months behind on the VIG. I paid the interest last week." "You paid last month's interest last week. You're still behind." Barrett pushed himself off the doorframe. He took a heavy step toward her. "Higgins is losing patience. He says if you can't pay with cash, we need to look at alternative arrangements." Sadie's stomach dropped. The cold reality of her situation clawed at her throat. She stepped back, her hand reaching into her coat pocket, her fingers wrapping around the small canister of pepper spray she carried. "I'll have the money on Friday, after I get paid," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Friday is a long time from now." Barrett took another step. He was close enough now that she could see the pockmarks on his cheeks. He reached out, his thick, calloused fingers grabbing the lapel of her coat. "Let's go inside. We can figure out a payment plan." Sadie brought her hand up, aiming the pepper spray, but Barrett was faster. He slapped her hand away. The canister skittered across the dirty carpet. He shoved her hard against the peeling wallpaper. Pain exploded in her ribs. She gasped, all the air leaving her lungs. "Don't be stupid," Barrett sneered, leaning his heavy body against hers, pinning her to the wall. "Let her go." The voice didn't echo. It didn't shout. It was delivered with the quiet, devastating calm of a guillotine blade dropping. Barrett froze. He turned his head slowly. Standing at the opposite end of the hall was Gabriel. The flickering light cast his face in sharp, terrifying shadows. He had shed the overcoat. He was just a man in a bespoke suit, but he looked like violence incarnate. Barrett let out a harsh laugh, though it sounded reedy and nervous. "Get lost, buddy. This is private business." Gabriel began to walk down the hall. He didn't rush. Every step was measured, silent on the cheap carpet. "I won't tell you again," Gabriel said. Barrett let go of Sadie and turned fully towards the newcomer, puffing out his chest. "You deaf," I said. Gabriel didn't wait for him to finish the sentence. In a movement so fast it blurred in the dim light, Gabriel closed the remaining distance. He didn't throw a punch. He reached out, his hand clamping around Barrett's throat with the mechanical force of a hydraulic press. He drove Barrett backward, slamming the heavier man into the opposite wall with enough force to crack the drywall. Barrett choked, his hands coming up to claw desperately at Gabriel's wrist. His feet dangled an inch off the ground. Gabriel's expression didn't change. There was no anger in his eyes. There was only an endless, freezing void. "You are touching something that does not belong to you," Gabriel whispered, his face inches from Barrett's turning purple visage. "If you come to this building again, if you say her name again, I will have my men peel you like a grape and salt the skin. Do you understand me?" Barrett couldn't speak. He managed a frantic, bulging-eyed nod. Gabriel opened his hand. Barrett dropped to the floor like a sack of wet cement, coughing violently, dragging air into his crushed windpipe. He scrambled backward like a crab, hit the stairwell door, and threw himself down the steps, his heavy boots clattering against the concrete. Silence descended on the hallway, heavy and absolute. Gabriel pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his breast pocket. He wiped the palm of his hand, then folded the cloth and returned it to his pocket. He turned to Sadie. She was leaning against her door, one arm wrapped around her bruised ribs, staring at him. She was pale, shaking slightly, but her eyes were furious. "I didn't need your help," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and rage. Gabriel stopped a few feet away. "He was going to hurt you. He was going to try." She pushed herself off the door, grabbing her keys with shaking hands. "Do you think you did me a favor? Higgins runs this block. Barrett is his dog. Tomorrow, Higgins is going to evict me. Or worse, he's going to send 3 guys instead of 1. Higgins will sell me this building tomorrow morning, or he will be at the bottom of the river by tomorrow night," Gabriel said simply. It wasn't a boast. It was an administrative fact. Sadie jammed her key into the lock. She twisted it, pushed the door open, and turned back to face him. The defiance in her face was magnificent. It was a dying star burning its brightest just before the collapse. "That's exactly the problem," she said, her voice cracking. "Barrett was a monster I understood. I knew his rules. Now I owe my life to a monster I don't." She stepped inside and moved to slam the door in his face. Gabriel reached out, his large hand flattening against the cheap wood, stopping the door effortlessly. "Then let's establish some rules," he said. Gabriel stepped into the apartment. Sadie didn't try to push him out. She knew it was pointless. She released the door and backed away, retreating into the center of the cramped living space. The apartment was painfully small. A tiny kitchenette bled directly into a living area that contained a faded love seat and a small, scratched coffee table. Through a half-open door, Gabriel saw a mattress on the floor, neatly made. The air was freezing. A small electric space heater hummed in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the draft coming through the single-pane windows. It was spotless. There was no clutter, no dirt, just the hollow echo of poverty. Gabriel stood near the door, feeling larger and more imposing than he ever had in his life. He felt like an invader in a sanctuary. He looked at Sadie. She was standing by the kitchenette, her arms still wrapped defensively around her ribs. "Sit down before you fall down," Gabriel commanded softly. "I'm fine in my own house, thank you," she snapped back, though her knees were visibly shaking from the adrenaline crash. Gabriel didn't argue. He walked to the love seat, removed his suit jacket, and draped it carefully over the armrest. He sat down. The furniture groaned but held. He looked up at her, waiting. Sadie stared at him, bewildered. "What are you doing?" "Establishing rules. Sit." He gestured to the small wooden chair by the kitchen counter. Reluctantly, her exhaustion winning out over her stubbornness, Sadie sank into the wooden chair. She hissed as her ribs compressed. "You need to see Iris again," Gabriel noted, his eyes tracking the wince. "I need to figure out where I'm living tomorrow," she corrected, resting her forehead in her hands. "Because you just declared war on my landlord." "Higgins is a parasite. I was looking to expand my real estate portfolio in this district anyway. Consider him handled." Gabriel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "But you are correct. You owe me." Sadie lifted her head. A bitter smile touched her lips. "There it is. The mob boss comes to collect. What's the price, Mr. Mercer? Because I assure you, my bank account is still empty." "I don't want your money, Sadie." "Then what? You want me to run drugs, hide weapons under my mattress? Or is this a cliché where I have to be your escort for the next 6 months? The words were venomous, a defense mechanism thrown up like a shield. Gabriel didn't blink. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. For 5 years, his bed had been empty because he believed he was a plague. He believed anyone close to him would catch a stray bullet. He had built a fortress of isolation, and now, sitting in this freezing, tiny apartment, he realized he was tearing his own walls down for a woman who despised him. "I want you to work for me," Gabriel said evenly. Sadie scoffed. "I just told you." "Legitimately," he interrupted. "Mercer Enterprises owns a shipping and logistics firm on the east side. The Port Authority. It's entirely clean, tax-paying, unionized. We need a floor manager for the night shift. The current one is retiring." Sadie narrowed her eyes. "Retiring to Florida or retiring to a shallow grave?" A genuine, startlingly bright laugh escaped Gabriel. It was a deep, chest-rumbling sound that filled the small room, warming it more than the space heater ever could. Sadie blinked, entirely thrown off balance by the sound. It changed his face completely, shaving away the cruel, hard lines and leaving behind something devastatingly human. "Florida, Boca Raton. He bought a condo," Gabriel said, the ghost of a smile still lingering on his mouth. "You have experience in logistics. You already work a warehouse job. You know supply chains, inventory management, and loading dock protocols." "How do you know my resume?" "I know everything." Sadie shook her head, trying to clear it. "Why? Why do you care where I work?" "Because you are exhausted," Gabriel said, the smile fading, replaced by a terrifying sincerity. "Because you are working yourself into the ground to pay off predatory loans to street-level scum. Because you crashed into my car, and my brain has inexplicably decided that you are now my responsibility." "I am not your responsibility. I am aware, but I am offering you a transaction. You want to pay me back for the Volvo? For Barrett? You work for Mercer Logistics. You accept a salary that is appropriate for the position, which is triple what you make now combined. You pay off your debts. You move out of this icebox." Sadie stared at him. She looked for the lie. She looked for the trap door. Men like Gabriel Mercer didn't hand out lifelines without tying them into nooses first. "And if I say no," she asked quietly, "then I walk out that door. You continue to work 2 jobs. Higgins evicts you. And I have to spend the rest of my life wondering when you're going to crash a different Honda into another one of my vehicles." Sadie looked around her apartment. She looked at the frost creeping up the corner of the window. She thought about Barrett's heavy hands on her coat. She thought about the endless, grinding wheel of poverty that had been crushing her bones for 3 years. She looked back at Gabriel. He was sitting completely still, offering her an out. "I have conditions," Sadie said, her voice finding its steel again. Gabriel tilted his head. "Name them." "I report to the warehouse director, not to you. If this is a real job, you treat me like a real employee. I don't want you showing up on the loading dock in a custom suit to check my math." "Acceptable. Second," she continued, pointing a finger at him, "I pay you back for the Volvo, market value, deducted from my paycheck every month. I don't accept gifts." Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly. He hated the idea of taking her money, but he recognized the absolute necessity of her pride. If he broke her pride, he broke her. Market value minus depreciation. He negotiated softly. "Fine." Sadie let out a long breath, staring at her hands. "When do I start?" "Monday." Gabriel stood up, picking up his jacket. He slipped it on, his demeanor shifting back from negotiator to king. "You will resign from the diner and your current warehouse tomorrow. A car will pick you up on Monday at 7 p.m. for your first shift." "I can take the bus." Gabriel stopped at the door. He looked back at her, his eyes dark and absolute in the dim light. "You work for Mercer Enterprises now, Sadie. My floor managers do not take the bus. The car will be here at 7 p.m. He didn't wait for her to argue. He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. Sadie sat in the wooden chair for a long time after the door clicked shut. The apartment was still freezing, but the air felt entirely different. It smelled faintly of expensive cedar and ozone. She had just sold her soul to the devil, but for the first time in years, she felt like she might actually survive the winter. 3 months passed. The city thawed into a muddy, bitter spring, but the ice inside Gabriel Mercer remained stubbornly intact. He kept his promise. He didn't go to the warehouse. He didn't check Sadie's math, but he didn't stop watching. On the top floor of Mercer Enterprises, Gabriel sat in his dark office, staring at a bank of security monitors. Screen 4 showed loading dock B. It was 2 a.m. on a Friday. The camera feed was grainy, but it was clear enough to show Sadie. She was a force of nature in a high-visibility vest. She had filled out. The hollows under her cheekbones were gone, replaced by color and muscle. She was arguing with a forklift driver twice her size. Gabriel couldn't hear the audio, but he watched her point at a stack of badly palletized crates, her jaw set in a rigid line. The driver threw his hands up, argued back for exactly 3 seconds, then hung his head and got back into the machine to fix it. Gabriel's chest tightened. It was a phantom ache, a muscle memory of the night he carried her into the clinic. He knew exactly how much she made. He knew she had paid off Higgins, bought a decent mattress, and started sending a third of her paycheck into an escrow account labeled Volvo Depreciation. She was relentlessly competent. The warehouse output had increased by 14% since she took over the floor. The crew respected her because she worked harder than any of them, and she didn't take an ounce of disrespect. She was thriving, and she was completely out of his reach. "You're staring again." Gabriel didn't flinch. He just leaned back in his chair as Leo walked into the office, dropping a thick leather folder on the mahogany desk. "I am observing company operations," Gabriel replied quietly. "You're watching a woman yell at a forklift, boss." Leo tapped the folder. "The O'Connor crew hit one of our supply trucks on the I-95 corridor 2 hours ago, slashed the tires, took the cargo. That's the second strike this week." Gabriel pulled his eyes away from screen 4. The temperature in the room dropped. The O'Connor family ran the docks on the north side. They were crude, vicious, and aggressively expanding. "They're testing the fences," Gabriel said. He opened the folder, scanning the inventory manifest. It was a shipment of high-end electronics. Profitable, but not vital. It was a probe to see if Gabriel would bite back. "Do we bite?" Leo asked. his hand instinctively brushing his jacket where his holster sat. Not yet. If we hit back now, it becomes a turf war over televisions. We wait until they expose a vital organ, then we gut them. Gabriel closed the folder. Double the security on all transit routes. No trucks move without an escort. Done. Leo hesitated, glancing at the security feed. Should I put extra men at the warehouse? Gabriel looked back at Sadie. She was laughing now, sharing a thermos of coffee with a dock worker. It was a sharp, bright sound he could practically hear through the silence of the monitor. No, Gabriel said. O'Connor is an opportunist, not a fool. He knows the warehouse is a fortress. If we suddenly flood it with guards, he'll know we're protecting something valuable. It makes her a target. It was the logical move, but logic felt like sandpaper in Gabriel's throat. Down at the docks, the rain started around Fort Horaism. It was a cold, driving sheet of water that turned the concrete loading bays into slick hazards. Sadie pulled her collar up, holding a clipboard against her chest to keep the manifest dry. A massive 18-wheeler was backing into Bay 3. The driver was new. He was overcompensating, cutting the wheel too hard. "Whoa! Stop!" Sadie yelled, waving her flashlight. The driver didn't hear her over the roar of the diesel engine and the drumming rain. The back of the trailer swung wildly toward the concrete stanchion. If it hit, it would shear the door off and crush the inventory. Sadie didn't think. She sprinted toward the bay, waving the light directly in the driver's side mirror. "Hit the brakes!" The truck continued to slide. Suddenly, a heavy hand grabbed the back of Sadie's high-vis vest. The grip was absolute. She was hauled backward with brutal force, her boots skidding on the wet concrete. She collided with a solid wall of muscle wrapped in expensive wool. A second later, the truck slammed into the stanchion. Concrete cracked. Metal screamed. Sparks showered the wet pavement, landing exactly where Sadie had been standing a moment before. Sadie gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked up. Gabriel Mercer was staring down at her. His suit was ruined by the rain. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He was breathing heavily, his dark eyes wide and wild, with a terror that looked completely foreign on his face. "Are you out of your mind?" Gabriel roared. The sound cut through the noise of the rain and the idling truck engine. Sadie pushed herself out of his grip. Her adrenaline was spiking, turning instantly into defensive anger. "What are you doing here? You promised you wouldn't come here." "You were about to be crushed by 20 tons of steel for a pallet of laptops." "I was doing my job," Sadie shouted back, wiping the rain from her eyes. "I had it handled." "You did not have it handled. You were standing in the blind spot." Gabriel stepped closer. The rain was freezing, but the heat radiating off him was immense. He wasn't the cold, calculating ghost she had met months ago. He was furious, entirely unraveled. "You don't get to manage me," Sadie snapped, pointing a trembling finger at his chest. "I report to the director, not you." "The director isn't the one who pays your salary," Gabriel snarled, closing the distance until they were inches apart. "The director isn't the one who spends every night staring at a monitor, making sure you don't break your neck." The words hung in the cold, wet air. Sadie froze. Her anger evaporated, replaced by a sudden, terrifying clarity. "You watch me." Gabriel closed his eyes. The confession had slipped out, a crack in the foundation he had spent 5 years reinforcing. He opened his eyes, the absolute exhaustion settling deep in his bones. "Every night," he admitted softly, the fight draining out of him. "I watch you." Sadie stared at him. The rain ran down his sharp jawline. She should have been angry. She should have been disgusted. But all she felt was a strange, heavy pull in her chest. She remembered the empty half of his bed at the clinic. She remembered the way he had choked Barrett with zero hesitation, not to show dominance, but to build a wall between her and violence. She reached up. Her fingers, calloused and cold, brushed against his wet jaw. Gabriel shuddered. It was a microscopic movement, but to Sadie it felt like a seismic event. He leaned into her touch, just a fraction of an inch, his eyes sliding shut. He looked like a starving man who had just been handed bread and was terrified it was poison. "You're a liar, Mr. Mercer," Sadie whispered over the sound of the rain. Gabriel opened his eyes. "What did I lie about? You said you didn't want my money. You said you didn't want me to owe you." Her thumb traced the tense line of his jaw. "But you want everything else." Gabriel didn't deny it. He couldn't. Before he could speak, the screech of tires tore through the loading dock. 3 black SUVs tore past the security gates, smashing right through the heavy chain-link barriers. They fishtailed onto the wet concrete of the loading bay, forming a semicircle around Gabriel and Sadie. The doors flew open. The rain immediately turned into a war zone. Gabriel reacted with lethal muscle memory. Before the first shot cracked the air, he grabbed Sadie, throwing her behind the thick concrete pillar of the loading bay. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shredded the night. The rain turned into a mist of vaporized water and concrete dust. The 18-wheeler the driver had just crashed took the brunt of the assault, the heavy steel trailer ringing out like a massive bell as bullets tore into it. "Stay down," Gabriel barked, drawing a heavy matte black pistol from his shoulder holster. "Who are they?" Sadie yelled over the gunfire, pressing her hands over her ears. She wasn't paralyzed by fear, but her mind was struggling to process the sudden explosion of violence. "O'Connor," Gabriel grunted. He leaned around the pillar, firing 3 precise shots. 2 men by the closest SUV dropped. The gunfire intensified. "He didn't want the trucks. He wanted to draw me out. By attacking a warehouse. By attacking you." Gabriel looked at her, his eyes dark and urgent. "He found out I bought Higgins' block. He found out I placed you here. He thought you were a weakness." Sadie's stomach plummeted. A weakness. "Boss!" Leo's voice cut through the chaos. Gabriel's driver had arrived, screeching his own vehicle into the fray. Leo and 3 of Gabriel's men poured out, returning fire. The loading dock turned into a slaughterhouse. Gabriel pulled a spare magazine from his pocket and slammed it into his pistol. "When I move, you run for the admin office. It has a reinforced steel door. Lock it. Do not open it for anyone but me." "No." Sadie grabbed his arm. "I know the floor plan. The admin office is a dead end. We can cut through the staging area to the freight elevator. It goes down to the maintenance tunnels. We can get out." Gabriel stared at her. Most people in her position would be catatonic. Sadie was treating a mob shootout like a logistical supply problem. "They'll have men on the perimeter," Gabriel said. "Not by the steam vents. It's restricted access. The door is hidden behind the boiler." A bullet shattered a wooden pallet, a foot away from Gabriel's head, showering them in splinters. He didn't blink. He calculated the odds. "Lead the way," he said. Sadie didn't hesitate. She low-crawled behind the concrete barriers, navigating the maze of stacked crates with practiced ease. Gabriel followed closely, covering their rear. The warehouse was massive, shadows dancing wildly in the strobe of emergency lights and muzzle flashes. They reached the staging area. It was eerily quiet here, insulated by thousands of pounds of inventory. "The freight elevator is just past this row," Sadie whispered, pointing down a narrow aisle between 2 towering stacks of medical supplies. They moved quickly. Sadie reached the end of the aisle and turned the corner. She stopped dead. Standing in front of the elevator were 2 men in heavy tactical gear, holding shotguns. They turned at the sound of her boots. Time compressed. Gabriel stepped out from behind Sadie, shoving her backward. He raised his weapon, firing twice. The first man went down, hit in the chest armor, staggering backward. The second man raised his shotgun. Gabriel lunged, putting his body entirely between the weapon and Sadie. The shotgun blast was a deafening roar in the confined space. Gabriel jerked violently, a choked grunt escaping his lips. He didn't fall. He fired one more time, putting a bullet directly through the second man's visor. The man collapsed. Silence fell over the staging area, broken only by the distant echo of gunfire outside. Gabriel stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. Then his knees buckled. "Gabriel!" Sadie rushed forward, catching him before he hit the concrete floor. His weight was massive. They went down together in a tangle of limbs. Gabriel gasped, clutching his left side. His custom suit jacket was torn to shreds, the dark wool rapidly turning slick and black with blood. The buckshot had missed his center mass, but shredded his flank. "I'm fine," Gabriel gritted out, his face completely drained of color. He tried to push himself up, but his arm gave way. "You're not fine. You're bleeding out." Sadie's hands were covered in his blood. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through her adrenaline. She ripped off her high-vis vest and bunched it up, pressing it hard against his side. Gabriel hissed through his teeth, his head dropping back against the crates. "Get to the elevator! Leave me!" "Shut up," Sadie commanded, her voice cracking. "I am not leaving you here to die for me. You ruined my Honda. You owe me." A faint, blood-stained smile touched Gabriel's lips. It was a Civic. It was reliable. Sadie looked around frantically. She couldn't carry him. She couldn't drag him. Footsteps echoed down the aisle. Heavy boots, running. Sadie picked up Gabriel's dropped pistol. It felt incredibly heavy in her hand. She didn't know how to shoot, but she pointed it at the corner of the aisle, her hands shaking violently. A figure rounded the corner. "Don't shoot!" Leo yelled, throwing his hands up. He took one look at Gabriel on the floor and swore violently. "Perimeter is clear. O'Connor's men are retreating. We need to move him now." "We can't take him to a hospital," Sadie said, her mind racing. "They have to report gunshot wounds." "We're not," Leo said, kneeling down and hooking his arms under Gabriel's shoulders. "Grab his legs. We're going to Aris." The clinic smelled exactly the same. Antiseptic, ozone, and bleach. Gabriel lay on the surgical table in the center of the room. The overhead lights were blindingly bright. Dr. Aris was working with the frantic, focused speed of a man trying to beat a ticking clock. Blood-soaked gauze littered the stainless steel tray beside him. Sadie sat in the corner of the room on a small plastic chair. She was covered in Gabriel's blood. It was on her hands, her clothes, dried under her fingernails. She hadn't moved for 2 hours. Leo stood by the door, his posture rigid, his eyes hollow. "Got the last of it," Aris muttered, dropping a deformed lead pellet into a metal basin with a sharp clink. "He lost a lot of blood. The buckshot missed the kidney by a millimeter, but he's stabilized." Sadie let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for years. Her shoulders slumped, the adrenaline finally leaving her system, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. Aris began stitching the wound. "He's going to be out for a while. The anesthesia mixed with the blood loss. He needs quiet." "I'll stay," Sadie said. Her voice was raspy, barely a whisper. Leo looked at her. "You don't have to. I have men covering the building. You can go home." "I'm staying," Sadie repeated, looking up. The grey in her eyes was hard as flint. Leo nodded once, understanding that arguing was pointless. 10 hours later, the clinic was quiet. The harsh overhead lights were dimmed. Sadie was sitting by the bed. She had washed her hands and changed into a set of clean scrubs Eris had provided. She was watching Gabriel's chest rise and fall. He looked different in sleep. The terrifying aura of control was gone. He just looked like a man who was very tired and very hurt. Gabriel's hand twitched. A low groan rumbled in his chest. His eyes slowly fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, before they locked onto the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. He turned his head. He saw Sadie. He didn't look surprised. He looked devastated. "You're still here," he rasped, his voice raw. "I don't have anywhere else to be," Sadie said, resting her arms on the edge of the mattress. "My shift is over." Gabriel squeezed his eyes shut. He took a shallow breath, wincing as the stitches pulled at his side. The quarantine walls in his mind, the ones he had spent 5 years building, were screaming at him to push her away. He had almost gotten her killed. The violence he harbored had almost consumed her. "You need to leave," Gabriel said. He forced his voice to be cold, devoid of the emotion that was currently tearing him apart. "Leo will set you up with a new identity, a new city. I'll fund it. You'll never have to work a warehouse again." Sadie didn't move. "No." Gabriel opened his eyes, glaring at her. "Do not be stubborn, Sadie. You saw what happened tonight. O'Connor won't stop. Anyone near me is collateral damage. I am a plague. I ruin everything I touch. You saved my life. I put your life in danger in the first place." Gabriel raised his voice, pain flashing across his features. "If you hadn't hit my car, you would still be poor, but you would be safe. Look at you. You have my blood on your hands. It washes off." Sadie stood up. She wasn't intimidated by his anger. She recognized it for what it was: raw, bleeding terror. She leaned over the bed. She placed her hands flat on the mattress on either side of his head, trapping his gaze. "Listen to me very carefully, Gabriel Mercer," Sadie said, her voice low and steady. "I have spent my entire life being pushed around by men who think they know what's best for me. Men who take things from me. You are the first man who ever gave me a choice." Gabriel stared up at her, the fight slowly draining out of him. "I am trying to give you an out." "I don't want an out." Sadie leaned closer, her grey eyes burning with fierce determination. "I was drowning before I met you, working myself to death. I was a ghost. You woke me up. You think you're a monster because you live in the dark. But you walked into the light for me." Gabriel's breathing hitched. The hollow ache in his chest, the one he had carried for 5 years, suddenly felt full. It felt like a shattered bone finally setting back into place. "Sadie," he whispered, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "You don't get to send me away," she said fiercely, a single tear cutting through the exhaustion on her face. "You don't get to decide that I am too fragile for your world. I stood in front of a shotgun for you. I earned my place here." Gabriel slowly lifted his uninjured arm. His large, calloused hand cupped the back of her neck. His thumb wiped away the tear. He pulled her down, burying his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of cheap vanilla shampoo and antiseptic. "I'm sorry," Gabriel murmured against her skin, the final wall crumbling into dust. "I'm so sorry. Don't apologize," Sadie whispered, resting her forehead against his, her hands gently framing his face. "Just don't make me sleep alone anymore." Gabriel closed his eyes. For 5 years, the silence had been suffocating. Now, listening to the steady, strong heartbeat of the woman holding him, the silence felt exactly like peace. Gabriel and Sadie proved that sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with a total car wreck. He spent 5 years in the dark, but it only took one fearless woman to force him back into the light. Will the O'Connor family strike back? Or will the new queen of the underworld help Gabriel crush his enemies once and for all? Let me know your theories in the comments down below. If you loved this deep, gritty mafia romance, smash that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible audio dramas.